This is the very first Postmoney Café in 2024. And I'm here with Rudi, and we have a guest, Hugo Verver. Hi, Rudi. Hi, Hugo.
Hi everyone.
Okay, great to have you. We are talking about the role of the data analyst today, based on a concrete project that Hugo has performed at the health insurance company WGZ. And before we do that, I just want to remind you all that you can talk with us while we are on the air. So just below this video where you're watching this right now, you can enter the chat. You don't need an account or anything. Just provide your name, and you don't need a password. And you're in there, and you can add any questions or comments that you have while we are talking about this, and we keep an eye on it and bring it up throughout the cafe. Now to get started, maybe we can talk a little bit about the project. How did it get started? What triggered the project in the first place, Hugo?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. Good to be here. So there was actually the first project that we took on as a team. So we were formed as a data analytics team from a larger team of people working with data. So people doing some dashboarding and some people were doing like analysis. So we created this team analytics within WGZ. And we decided upon that we wanted to do something like collectively as a start of this new team. And we were thinking about what can we do? Where can we bring some value to the business? And we decided to do like a kind of a different type of analysis with respect to complaints. Because from one side, complaints are quite interesting. They're a very rich source of valuable data. Because we can see where complaints are coming from, what people are complaining about. So we can do some NLP type of techniques on the complaints itself to see what they are complaining about. We were also looking into where people actually put in the complaints. So on the website, we did some benchmarking with different organizations to see how their landing page on the website looked like. So very different style and types of analysis, so that we were all working on the same overarching theme, complaints. And me together with two colleagues actually decided that we should also definitely do some process mining on actually handling the complaints as well. So that was just part of this whole big package of looking at complaints with respect to WGZ.
That's really interesting, right? Because often we say that process mining can be used together with different data analysis techniques, and there, you had that context very much. So looking at that data from all kinds of angles, and then process mining is one of them.
So maybe for a little bit of context, so WGZ is a healthcare insurance company, right?
Sure.
So it is. Every country has a slightly different way to organize their healthcare insurance. So can you tell me a little bit about how it's done here in the Netherlands, Hugo?
So here's actually everybody has to have a healthcare insurer. So we have different products, services that we offer. Also kind of based on different population targets. So we have some products that are more, I would say, for elderly or people that are heavy healthcare takers, for example, or even students that would be more like a budget version. And you kind of you pay this monthly fee, and then you're insured for things that happen to you. We have this what we call the base insurance, and that just ensures that if you need healthcare just for your health, that you can go kind of almost anywhere to get you fixed up in a way, and it will be insured. And then we have these additional packages, for example, for teeth or whatever it is that you that fits your budget, your needs, these type of things. So in a way, if you look at complaints, they can come from multiple sources in a way. So if I were to go to for example, a dentist, and I would just walk in, make a picture of my teeth to as a consult to see what would be the next steps. I have to pay this dentist if it's like on a very emergency type of consult. And you can actually make a picture of the receipt, send it to your healthcare insurer. You would get it reimbursed. That would be like the normal way. Sometimes you do not get it fully reimbursed due to the agreements that you have with your insurer. And it could be the case that then somebody is complaining, right? So I'm not like satisfied, or I disagree with the fact that you do not fully reimburse. These type of things can happen.
Yeah. And if you are looking at complaints, so of course, different companies, depending on what kind of product or services they offer, they have some kind of complaint process. So how does it work in general? So if you are a customer and then you have a complaint, for example, what do you typically do?
So maybe let's look at it from a design perspective, right? So we are, of course, when you analyze it, we will see like how it really looked like, but you probably have some documented process. So maybe we can walk through that first before we go into the analysis in more detail.
Yeah, for sure. What Rudi asked is if a customer has a complaint, then they can either call us. That would not be that is one way to actually file your complaint, right? So you would actually speak to a spokesperson of us, and then you kind of say what you're complaining about, and either this person fills out this form after the call with respect to the information what he complains about, then it's like a real complaint. But I think that the way that we're supposed to work is to actually try to tackle the complaint right away, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're just talking to them, try to solve the issue immediately. That's the preferred way, and what we also try to do, right? To be there for our customers. Or otherwise, there's also like an entry on the website, for example, like this particular page where you can actually file a complaint, where you can actually state what the complaint is and also like a section what you expect from us with respect to that with that complaint. So that's more from like a customer perspective if they have a complaint, and the more like internal process that we have if there is a complaint. So they're all gathered in a way. People look at the complaint, they try to figure out like what the subject is of the complaint, what the cause is of the complaint. These type of things are all like filled out in this case in Salesforce. Like that's also what I see as a data analyst. These type of like resource information with respect to a complaint. Like of course like client number, because we need to know who it is. These type of things. Then they're actually, so to say, that then they're laying there and they have to be put in progress. So we have like colleagues of mine that actually process all these complaints. So if they have time, they take a complaint, they put it into progress, they work through the complaint to actually get it handled. And that, I would say, like the most like straightforward process there would just be to put it into progress. So I pick up a complaint, I put it in progress. I would call the customer to see what is going on, and then form an answer and then finish it. That would be the like most straightforward 3-4 step type of process with respect to handling the complaints.
Yeah, and are there some legal or European guidelines, for example, for this process? We can imagine that they have already guidelines for complaints processors, right? So I think so are there things they have to keep in check at least, or to report out on?
Eventually, we have to report out on like the amount of complaints that we have as an organization. I'm not sure with respect to the process that we actually have to have a particular step in place. I'm not sure.
No, but regarding the time, so if I submit a complaint, should you respond within 30 days or 60 days?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's what the like there the legislation is in a way, but I know that we on the website have like a particular amount of days in which we say we get in touch. So it cannot be that if you have a complaint that it would take like 1 month before it's being processed. So we have these agreements, and that's actually kind of like agreement that we have with our clients, right?
Yeah. So it's your promise, right? Your promise to your customers.
It's type of a promise. So if they hand in a complaint, it's on the website there that like a couple of days that we process it and get in touch. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very good. And maybe one thing I was curious about. So you mentioned the complaints process is a good process, very rich data source, also for these types of analytics, different types of analytics techniques and to analyze. But was there also a question from the people working in the complaints process that they wanted to gain more insights?
Yes. So there's actually there was like a process designed, architectural design of the process, but there are actually questions with respect to let's see how we do our work, what we are actually doing, because the gut feeling there was that everybody had kind of made a process of their own, how to go from like put it into progress to it actually being finished or handled. So very different ways of going from like A to Z. So that was one of the questions in the beginning. So what I referred to in the beginning, that we as a team did like a lot of different type of analysis with respect to complaints. There, like we had this iterative sessions with the stakeholders, also from the complaints department, to discuss like this is what we are going to do. What do we need to take into account? What can we expect? These things. So in these discussions, it actually became clear that it would be nice to just know how we are actually doing our work, because the belief there was that it was going quite okay, but maybe not in a that everybody was working like mono in a way, like doing the same thing all over again. So if, for example, if Rudi would also handle cases and he would get sick, that I could just immediately jump in and know, oh, he's at step 4, I can do step 5, 6, 7, because there was a lot of like variability. At least to believe, because we didn't make it visual yet. So,
yeah, of course, that's the benefit then from having a more standardized process, right? That, it's more consistent and easier to replace people and things like that.
Indeed, yeah.
Great. And it sounds like you had the ideal conditions, because we all working in process mining know how important it is, right, to have the subject matter experts on board and interested in this type of analysis, because we can't do it without them. So it sounds like you had their interest for sure.
Indeed, yeah. No, that's I would say a really nice thing. Also looking back at other initiatives, this is really nice that we had like stakeholders that were willing to definitely see what the process looked like, because that can also be scary, right? Because you're part of it, or you're managing it. You never know what you dig up in a way. So that was good. No, we were lucky there.
And then what was the kind of the role or the question that was posted to you as a data analyst? Was there already a project going on, or were you the person who did kind of take the initiative to kick off the whole initiative?
I would say when we decided upon first internally with our team of analysts, like what can we do with respect to complaints, then we ended up like at this kind of like popcorn style type of things. Oh, we can do this, we can do that, and there was also process mining there involved. And then it was more like, okay, let's see what the process looks like. Can we find some like potential interesting insights? So that was like a really broad perspective on that. And then in the first sessions together with the stakeholders, it became clear that was like, okay, let's see how we are actually doing our work. What steps are we actually taking? So that was more from a, also like a kind of a broad approach. And then like more specific was, I think it was based a bit on gut feeling, that there might be something with respect to if medical advice is involved within a complaint, that it took too much time to get it from in progress to actually being finished. So that was a bit of information that we used to make it a bit more specific, but we started out like with a very broad, let's just first see what is going on here.
Yeah, so there was some kind of hypothesis going on, but you were not committing to that yet at that moment.
Indeed.
Yeah, and that's quite common, I would say, right? It's a mix often of just the desire to have an overview of what's going on in the first place, but there are some gut feelings, some hunches based on the domain knowledge of the people involved. So it's a great starting point. Yes. Okay, so maybe what we can do next, we already promised when we announced the session, we promised some before and after pictures. So that's what we wanted to do next, to show you the beginning and the end of the analysis. And we will then, in the remainder of the session, talk more like specifically how did we get from the before to the after. But let's see if it works to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
I cannot see it, Anna. But I know what he looked like, right? So.
Yes, if it's visible to you guys out there, we can still describe it. So because we have, I think now we can see it.
Yeah, Eric mentions that
Eric could see it all along. Okay,
able to see it, and Dion as well. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yes. So what we are seeing here is the before picture. So that's kind of one of the first pictures that you got, and it's not even the full picture, it's just doesn't fit on the screen, right? So it's a part of it. And what you can also see is that the activity slider is really low and not even at 30%. If we're looking at the after picture, it's fitting on the whole screen, and we see all of the activity. So it's a big contrast, right, between the first picture and then the last picture, and a lot of things happened to get from this before to the after, which we are going to talk much more in detail.
You probably complained about the complaint process.
Exactly.
But maybe also even the improvement went on even further, right? Just yesterday you brought us updated pictures. If we're just looking at January last year and January this year, we also put them up here and next to each other. So it's already much simpler and cleaner than the initial version. But then even like within this 1 year, the process was even more streamlined and follows more the expected process, as you can see on the right. So maybe let's talk a little bit about this before and after. So why was this initial process so complicated, and why was it a problem, Hugo?
So I think for all the colleagues involved, it was clear to how to go from A to Z in a way, what they should do, because they're the experts on it. But there was the way you do it was a bit open. So it's not a very step 1, step 2, step 3. This is what you have to do in this order type of process. And next to that, the way they kind of document it was also different between different colleagues. So some would use notes within case notes, which were visible in Salesforce, but that would again be a different table, different variable where we could pick these notes from, and others would put it in a more task activity type of entry. So that's actually what they did. So they knew they had to document what they did, how they get from in progress to it actually being handled. But the way they did it was was a bit open. So some would use these notes, and then also using the notes, I could say okay, I'm calling a client. Somebody else would say, okay, I have an outbound call. Somebody else would say call client or client call or whatever. So there's a lot of variability in the way it was actually being documented. And that's also what we see in this before type of process map. Because then if you can actually put in anything you want kind of manually to just document what you did, then it becomes an insane amount of activities. So we actually had, I think it was 12,000 different activities in
12,000,
a couple of months with respect to handling complaints. So we were actually joking about that's almost, it sounds even almost impossible to have that many activities, different activities with respect to handling a complaint.
Yeah, so a lot of different variations of the same thing because people were writing it down a little bit differently.
Indeed, in different, at different locations and in different style. I would say different style, different locations. If it's not in like a uniform format, it becomes very hard to actually show it in a way in a uniform format, right?
Yeah. So. It's also a lot of work, right? That they all have their own style,
indeed.
format, process.
Yeah, indeed. And that's so we asked around like how come, and people were just saying like, for example, if you're already really the expert on handling complaints, and I would go from, for example, like the call center, and I would go like, okay, my next step within this organization would be to handle complaints, and you would be kind of my coach or like walk with me for a month to just show me how to do it. I would just kind of copy and paste what you do because then that's my reality in a way. But then Anna would do it differently and she would get like a new apprentice in a way. And so, that's how it was actually stayed the way it was probably for quite some time. Yeah,
but maybe with complaints, they can have kind of different backgrounds, right? So maybe different departments are involved or different people need to kind of evaluate the actual complaint to formulate the right answer, right? So it's maybe also not something they do every day, or maybe they are partially involved in handling these complaints, for example. So I can imagine that it's not easy to get standard work for these kind of
indeed
things.
No, so because it depends on the complaint itself, right? So sometimes you have to have a discussion with the payment department. Another time you have to have a discussion with with respect, for example, to medical advice, or you have to have a discussion with the people from the insurance side of this organization. So indeed, very different steps you need to undertake in order to go from A to Z. But then, if you can just write down whatever you did in different formats in a way, then you kind of blow up all these activities in a way.
So now being confronted with these 12,000 activities, what did you do? Did you try to cluster them somehow or clean up that data? What did you try?
Yeah, definitely. So because some were just quite clear or straightforward what to do. Sometimes if you formulate an answer and then kind of finish the complaint or it's actually being handled, then there might be some like after work or like control activities, and people would just put down controlling whether this happened, controlling whether that happened, controlling whether blah blah happened. So a lot of different variations, so a lot of different activities. But then luckily from a data analyst perspective, coding wise, you can just kind of filter out all these different activities and say, like, if a particular activity actually has controlling whether ... then kind of convert them to controlling activity. So that definitely helped, but not all things could be clustered. So we focused on the main things. And this one, for example, was like really straightforward. I could do it, but then there was a lot of like kind of going back and forth between domain experts, because some things for me were just unclear to what particular activity it should belong, right? So maybe if you're here for, I don't know how long that you already know it, even as a data analyst, but I would say that this definitely needed like domain expertise in order to kind of place the activity in the right kind of bracket.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So you worked with the domain experts to do the clustering for the ones which you couldn't match yourself, to put in a right group, like what kind of activity it is.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So we had from the start onwards with the stakeholders, these iterative sessions. We've kind of formed like this working group, and we had like a meeting every couple of weeks to just talk about the progress, what we are actually seeing. And that was what you just showed, like the before picture. That's not what you want, right? Because there's like so many things flying around. You do not know where to begin. Where is actually the potential the potential for actually improving the process. So we needed to do a couple of things. Well, the first thing that came to mind then was, okay, let's cluster these events to still have like a more straightforward process that we could actually analyze and actually formulate some types of either hypothesis to delve into, or otherwise already formulate some potential improvements.
Yeah, maybe a quick question on the clustering. I'm curious, how far did you get with that? Because I remember we had at Prosmining Camp a presentation from Leonard Studer from the city of Lausanne, where they had a similar situation with one of the, I think, building permit processes, free text data. I think they had 40,000 different activities. And I think they tried text mining and they brought it down to a few thousand or maybe 1,000 or something, but it was still too much. So in the end, even after clustering, it was still not usable. So how was that for you? How did that work out?
Hard in a way, because I think we definitely did a good job clustering these activities, but we ended up with, I think it was 2,000 or 3,000 different activities. So then we decided, and they were all one. So I made a count like how many times a particular event was actually, or activity was present within the data. Mm-hmm. So, for example, outbound call, a couple of thousand. So that's nice that they're all clustered in there. But then there were also a lot of like ones, right? So a lot of activities that only happened once in a particular time frame. So for some analysis, we actually decided to make like a cutoff point and say like, okay, we only bring in the activities. So we're only going to show activities that are actually 7 times, for example. But then, on the other hand, you lose a lot of cases. And so there was like a hard trade-off to be able to show a quote-unquote normal process that we could actually analyze. But on the other hand, losing a lot of potentially rich data. So that was hard. Yeah, that was hard.
And which strategy did you use? So was it the strategy of mapping, right? So to use partially activity names, so kind of do it more the text mining type of style, right? So you see part of a name and then do the matching. Or did you also use process mining as part of it, right? Because in process mining, you can kind of see where in the order things happen and maybe classify based upon that principle, right? So if you know, for example, these activities happen before the decision, then it should be an activity that happens before the decision. Otherwise, it's weird, right?
I did both. I think the majority definitely lies on the more like text mining type. So, for example, I had the example with the control activities type of work, but sometimes it would just state like FG, which is like financiële genoegdoening. So they would get like a particular some sort of like reimbursement. So it didn't state like control activity or whatever it is, or controlling whether there was actually money sent to the customer or whatever it is. It would just state like FG with some numbers. So that was text mining stuff. So we had some coding where we just say like everything that has controlling whether happened would be a control activity, and then we figured out, okay, there were a lot of like FG with a particular number. This should also be control activity. Okay, let's put that in control activity. But then we had a lot of, for example, discussion. And that's probably something, what you're asking about, Rudi. A discussion could happen before actually talking to the client, because you want to discuss with a colleague of the payment department or from the insurance department, what you should actually say to the customer. But then if you had a discussion with the customer, there could still be another type of discussion happening. So therefore we used like a couple of, did this already happen? Then it should be that. So it's the if-then statements chronologically, but so that's more like a process mining type of clustering. So we did that as well. You just have the very like abstract like activities that could either be in the beginning or at the end of the process. And if you know what the middle is, then you can still map them, right? So we did that for some.
So your particular example, the discussion before the actual decision could still be gathering additional information, right? As an input for the decision, while the discussion after the decision has been made is kind of the feedback, right?
So it could be a learning loop back to the organization, indeed. For sure.
It's a really nice example that shows like, sometimes people think about process mining as a very linear approach, but often you use the process mining tool already in the data validation and the data cleaning phase, right? It's an iterative use. So you start with this full data set with 12,000 or how many activities there are, and then you condense it, and then what's left, you can look at it, and then again iteratively add to the rules that you have to get it better and better. And I have a question, Hugo, for you from the perspective of the data analyst. I mean, you are in between the data and the people who are the subject matter experts, who you're also relying on to do this kind of grouping, right? So actually you're looking at different versions of the process map with them, or maybe different examples, cases. How was that for you to be like between them and the data and the interpretations maybe that were going on already?
So in a way, again, I think in this particular case, I was very lucky with the stakeholders or the people I met up with in these iterative sessions, because I not so much had to convince them about why the data should change in order to make like process insights or process improvements. Because from a perspective of the complaint handling colleagues, it makes sense, right? That they have this open field where they can put their notes or their task or whatever. Because if something pops up eventually and you have to kind of re-engineer or check what happened, they could still do it because it's there. But from a process and process improvement perspective, it's not okay, because hence the 12,000 activities. So luckily, they were also looking for some insights to improve the process. So they could also set like, okay, no, it's probably going fine. Let's leave it at this. But they definitely wanted to have like improvements. So we were really set on a course of like improving the data quality. And of course, that takes time as well. So again, to come back to your question, Anna, I think I was very lucky with these stakeholders that were enthusiastic about where we can go with it. And they were definitely committed to do a lot of things to actually make this happen.
Okay.
So personally, I did not stumbled upon a lot of resistance. Also not from the people who are actually handling the complaints, because we in the working group we had two people who were like not the managers of the process or the process owner, but really like the colleagues who are handling the complaints, and they just provided information of why they do certain things, what is actually what is actually a nice way to, for example, report their activities, because there still had to be a choice had to be made whether everybody should put the notes in the notes column, for example, or in the activity column, because we wanted to have this like uniform type of documentation, right? So we definitely use their input, and I think that helps as well in these type of processes, because if you want to change things, it might be good to have a mix between a bit of like bottom up, what makes sense, and then like also from top down, more design type of thinking about it.
It's great that they were enthusiastic. Were there maybe a little bit too enthusiastic in the beginning, to maybe when the data wasn't good enough yet?
From I would say from different perspectives. Too enthusiastic in, and it might be too harsh to say, like jumping to conclusions with respect to what can we do with the data that we already have, and also a bit too enthusiastic if I think back to it with respect to how fast we could actually have a good process map in place. Not a good process in place, but a good process map in place. So it's not a switch that you just tap or go from put on or off with respect to data quality. There have to be like a lot of steps in between in order to get it okay. Checks in between to see, are we on the good track? Is everybody still kind of on board or involved in a way? So in that sense, too enthusiastic. And luckily the enthusiasm stayed up until this moment as well, because it's a long road to get from the before to the after scenario. And with respect to with what we can do with the data, there was like a bit of like going back and forth from like my perspective as a data analyst. I'll say, okay, you can use this data for this particular goal, but not for another goal. Right? Yeah. So it's kind of risk tolerance with respect to what we are omitting, because we were omitting data. If we say, okay, let's just take all the activities that appear 7 times or more. So you get like a basic process, but you miss out on a lot of data as well. You could use it for, if something is in the process that shouldn't be there, I would say that's something you can use it for, even though you're actually missing out on still a lot of data. Because then you can inform all the colleagues like, hey, we need to do this differently. But if you really want to like improve with respect to, for example, like if in handling a complaint there is like medical advice involved, and we discussed this like early on in this session, that the gut feeling was a bit that they might lead to delays, and we could actually see in the beginning that if cases had some type of medical advice involved, it would actually take way longer for them to go from in progress to actually being handled or finished. But I didn't dare to point the finger to the ones who actually had to give medical advice, because in the beginning we could not see when they actually requested medical advice as an activity, right? So for that sense, I would say no. That's way too enthusiastic to say like, hey, here's going wrong. Discuss with then the colleagues from the medical advice to set up a new type of agreement between the ones handling complaints and medical advice, because we needed better data. Anyway, because I would say like, and that's then from the analyst perspective that it's very hard to know like whether a small sample is actually representative for the population in a way. And then especially since we saw like a high variability, that just means you need more data, because if it's changing like all the time and many different variations, then a small sample is not the population. So there was some carefulness from my side about conclusions that we could actually draw from the data in the beginning.
Yeah, so maybe before we continue looking forward about the change and about how you deal kind of with the data quality aspect of it, there are some questions from the audience. And one of the questions is if you could tell a little bit more about where the data was coming from. And so what's kind of the source of where you obtain the data and how you get it into the right format, right? So we understand the problem, right, with the data, but what lies kind of before you actually were able to get the data? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Did you do it yourself, or were there others involved?
Yes, together with some colleagues of mine, we always look into if we have like a project. In this case, like a process mining project, we kind of discuss like, okay, what data do we need? Where do we get the data from? And then kind of like, how do we actually make sure that from these different data sources, we all have like the same identifier? What is the identifier? because there is an identifier, but sometimes it's called like what ID in another data source. It's called ID. So you need to be knowledgeable about these things. And for me, luckily, I had a colleague who already looked into this data and actually had a background a bit in complaints as well. So that helped. Next to that, to talk about how we did get the data. So I think eventually we made in the very early stages, we had to do a lot of things. We had to jump through a lot of hoops to actually get the data. And that might be something Anna is also going to show later on, but it would actually take, I think the first version was over like 1,000 lines of coding, because we need to get data from all different tables. And in this case, like Salesforce tables, so notes, case history, and we need to all to kind of bind them all together. And now it's way more easier, because now it's just with one simple SQL query, we could tap into the case. The case and task is actually two. So the case is the case information, and then task is the activities that they kind of did with respect to the case. So we're actually combining those two together now, and then we're already done. So my life became way easier than in the beginning. Because in the beginning it was like really searching for, what do we need in order to kind of map how a case goes from like actually, from coming in as a complaint, then how it's enriched with information from the ones the book in the complaint. So these would be in the case information. But then if it goes from the just being there and kind of booked in to in progress, so if somebody takes on the case and starts to process it, then we need to use like the case history table to see that it changed from ingeboekt to in progress, or the date of the complaint into in progress. And again, also case history eventually for that it's being finished. Need to have the co-worker table that we have within the organization, because we need to know who actually handled the case. So I would say there's like 7 different tables that we actually needed to tie together in order for us to have from the data side an identifier from a case with information, who handled it, what is it about, and what are the tasks in between from getting it to the complaint coming in to actually being finished.
Yeah. Okay. And so you used SQL to draw the data directly from the Salesforce system.
So we tap in. So use this. We use R. We can actually tap in Salesforce via R, via SQL query to just get the tables, the information in. Yeah, and like one like tip that I could give or learning point there is actually in the beginning put the time slot like to a very small like a very small time slot way, because otherwise if you still need to tie everything together, it doesn't make sense to have like millions of records in order to make it work. If you make it work with, for example, for 1 or 2 or 3 days, then it should also work for 3 months, right? So the processing time goes a bit faster.
Yeah, much easier to iterate, to get it right? To get everything.
Yeah, it makes more sense to find these things. And maybe one thing that pops up to my mind now is actually we sometimes we went to the because we kind of get the data from like the Salesforce database, but we can also go to Salesforce itself, what we can actually see with respect to the case. So we could do some checks in between, and we did that with the ones that handling the complaints as well, to just see whether we were seeing the same things, like on the front end and the back end.
Okay.
Yeah. So let us know if that answered the question. Really, do you think the remaining questions, should we bring them in now, or do they fit better later? in the session?
Yeah, I think we can bring them in later. So some of them are more advanced, right? Kind of the lookout after the initiative things you can use. So let them bring in. So maybe to finish the question for Marcus. So to summarize, you used SQL for the extraction, right? And then R for the transformation of the data to put it into the right format, event log format.
Yeah, indeed, but we used an SQL query within R.
Within
so you
R,
can have if you have an authenticator, then you can make this connection, like this database connection.
Do we need to then see that you kind of cleanly pulled the table data and then do the transformation in R? Or is it that you run a query and already doing some transformation before you are doing other things in R?
No. So, and this probably has to do with my background. So I have an academic background, so I'm trained in R. Yeah. And probably would touch upon it this point later. But that would be my like natural way to do things. So for me, SQL is just, I use SQL to get kind of like an export of the data, and then I will do all my data wrangling transformations in R or Python.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay, so that makes it very clear for Marcus. Yeah.
Okay, great, very good. Now maybe to come back to the path that we were on, looking really at how do we get from this before to this after picture. What you just told us before was, I think, really nicely illustrating how you also had to protect a little bit the people on the business side to draw conclusions. And you gave, I think, 3 nice examples, like some of the conclusions you could draw, for example, things that are not supposed to happen, right? If they happen, of course, you can analyze that and you can interpret that. But because you had to remove so many cases which you could not successfully map, you were also lacking data. So, for example, drawing conclusions about percentages or like general process behavior could be difficult. But also the other example that you mentioned, like timing, if you didn't have the actual moment of time when something was sent to someone, you couldn't really judge, like, you know, if they were late or something. So there was some
so problems with like root cause analysis where the causes of the delay. If you don't have the information, then it's a guessing game.
Yes,
anybody's guessing game.
Yes, exactly. So some things were possible, others were not possible, and you as the data analyst protected a little bit the people to let them know what they can already analyze and what not. And so making the clustering was one step, but then you went one step further to actually improve the data quality, because some things couldn't be even mapped or clustered, right? Because it was a lot, but also I think you mentioned that some of them were also it was not clear even from the text field, like what the meaning was. Even afterwards, it was just not possible to classify correctly anymore. So you also made some changes then in the actual information systems to improve the data quality in the future. What did you do there?
Yeah, so we discussed with the stakeholders, like what can we do and actually to further improve the data quality. And from a data analyst perspective, it's having like this uniform style of data, and if also like from a validity perspective, like do we measure what we want to measure? So in a way, like each activity should tell what actually happened, and then we kind of decided upon there like that many activities that you can do with respect to handling a complaint. So they were actually drawn up like 36 different activities, and this could be like outbound call. This could be like an inbound call. This could be a discussion with the payment department. This could be discussion with the more insurance department. This could be asking for medical advice. This could be a discussion with a coworker, even like a feedback loop. So if you look at the whole process, there were actually like 36 activities that one could do, and they would actually kind of encapture everything that one can do with respect to handling a case. So we decided upon these 36 activities, and we had the discussion like, okay, it would be very nice to have them like in a uniform format, how can we get this done, right? So people before were just putting in notes, we're putting in tasks, but that's all manual work, right? And we all make mistakes, so we were asking ourselves, like, okay, what can we do? What can actually help us, and what can actually help me as a data analyst? So we decided to actually get in contact with Salesforce, so the software provider, and to see whether we can have like a drop-down menu in the task table, so to say, where these colleagues could actually just click on, it would just drop down, and they could actually click on the activity that they just did. And that actually helped tremendously. And that's actually a bit of a funny story, because we had this drop-down menu while we still didn't know that you could drop down and then still manually adapt or adjust the entry. So colleagues were actually, and it's from like a positive side, they were actually putting in the time at which they did this activity. So they would just click on the menu, it would just drop down, and they would say, like, for example, outbound call, and then 15:35, example, and then press enter. Which is not nice, again, from a data analyst perspective, because then we get all this inflation in how many different activities we get. But then again, that would be a very easy fix, because if the first or the first and second name of an activity, we could cluster them easily. But still, so that there was this, and I think that's normal to just have like this period of time where people are adapting to a new like reality of how they should document what they are doing with respect to a case. That just takes time for it to be hopefully near perfect, but to actually have like a good flow there.
Yeah.
So that was, so for me, that was actually nice to have that we were able to have this technical change kind of in place that really helps, I think, both my colleagues at the complaint department as well as my colleagues at the analytics department.
Yeah, and it sounds like a mix of a technical change and a little bit of training, right? So people had to learn that you think it's helpful, but actually we have the timestamp automatically recorded. You don't have to put in the time manually. Just select it and don't add anything to it. So
yeah, indeed, and I think so. In this case, the stakeholders that were on this journey from the beginning onwards. So Nadine and Erik, they made like these presentations for all the co-workers to show, okay, this is the new reality. We're gonna kind of log or document the things we do this particular way for this reason. There was like this quality handbook being built and handed out amongst the co-workers to say, okay, this is the new reality, the kind of like quality standard that we that we're actually going to put into place. There were some like quality coaches being appointed, so people actually looking over the shoulders to see if everything is going right, and that helped tremendously. But then still, we need to do some like iterative sessions with respect to, I would check for a particular time frame, for example, November, to see, okay, how is it going now? And then in December, how is it going now? And you would actually see this number of different activities. So in the beginning, we have 12,000, and then with all the clustering, 3,000. We just did it in January. That was the one like the after you just showed, Anna. We had 50 different activities, while we have the 36 in place, right? So there's only like a difference of 14 that are not like 100% overlapping with the 36, but they were easily being clustered again. So we almost have like full, like the full picture of the process, how it is going now. So and for some people, some co-workers that were used to put it into notes, it was a very big change because they had to go to like a different place where they put their activity in the task table. Others were already doing that, but it's just like a small adaptation with respect to how they should actually put it in, and maybe like a small difference in how they would word it. So now, for example, it's like telephone outgoing. Others would say like outbound call or calling client. Now it's just like outgoing telephone, and that should be clear for everybody because we have this these 36 activities in place with a column that actually describes what it is. So it should be clear now for everybody, what an activity is actually, what it entails.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's another question from Nick. Nick is asking if you also had redundant items. So for example, if you see an outgoing email or an incoming email, that you also have the actual email, right? So then you have two items kind of happening at the same time. So did you need to deal with these redundant items, and how did you deal with that?
So let me see to get it clear. So you're saying, Rudi, if an email comes in, and then like a complaint email?
Yeah, so you can have the logging of the email, right? So the person uses one of the 36 items and then says, I have received an email or incoming email. And then you have the physical email maybe as part of the CRM system or maybe in the physical email box, right? And that also has a timestamp. And the question now is, if them are recording kind of the same event. So do you see that as a redundant item or...
so it doesn't happen that much because we also have like this contact moment type of like table where, for example, the contact moments between like VGZ and a client are being registered. So you could say like if I make a call, I could have like this outbound call should be there with a timestamp. So we could use that as a control mechanism to see what the overlap is between people actually putting in the task table like outbound call and then whether it corresponds with like a physical one. So that's like more of a control mechanism to see. And I would say like there, if it's up to a particular standard, then like leave it as it is. And that also depends on like where you want to improve in the progress, right? In the process, right? So if it's definitely an hypothesis about like outbound calls, then do this check. Check also the other table where we have like the factual data that is not manually put in there, but just automatically the systems. I would say then do a check or use that one. But we did encounter it in some instances. But then I think mostly I handled these type of things in Disco itself eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just see and then filter out particular path. Then I say, okay, this should never happen. So I think,
Yeah, so one of the things what you could do, for example, is you can filter on one particular or a group of activities, right? So using the activity filter and then look for all activities that happen after each other with a very limited amount of time. So within 5 minutes, for example, to find these groups. Yeah.
Indeed.
And then if you just remove some of these redundant activities, then you don't lose any cases, right? You're just losing some events, but you have the full representativeness for the cases.
Yeah. Oh, indeed.
Now, maybe it's a good time to show then also how much you could simplify by making these changes. So first from the clustering to after the actual system change in Salesforce, where you introduce this drop-down list with the predefined activities, how that before and after looks like for your data extraction, right? So maybe let me know when you can see my screen again. So
I can see the screen.
So we had this very complex starting point, which is, like we said, only a portion of the full reality, and you got it to this picture. And this is now the picture which you mentioned, which has a little bit more than the 36, but they could be interpreted.
Yeah, indeed. Yes.
So that's after the change where you had the Salesforce change.
Yeah,
made.
I think this one is somewhere from November and then all the way back to beginning of the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so it's really after the technical change was made. And then, as we saw, just the January and January comparison. But looking from the data side, right? So before, when you were doing the clustering, so you sent us just a snippet of your data definition over here. And yeah, we can see it's in Dutch, right? But for those of you who can read some of those items, you see that there's very similar names. For example, mevrouw gesproken, meneer gesproken, which is I talk to the women, I talk to the men, right? In different versions. So that's these kind of mappings, right? That you were talking about, that you had to make.
Indeed, yeah. So these nodes could all be clustered to the activity, like telephone outgoing, because it's just about like calling.
Yeah.
I have called, voicemail, these type of things. So this all indicates that there was some type of like outbound call to a client.
Yeah. Exactly. So.
And how does it work? It's part of the name, right? So you are looking for part of the text in the
indeed, yes.
Yeah, and there's also some expressions like regular expressions with the BGB, or is that?
Yeah, and that has to do with some with how some things are actually from like the data side, how they come out. So sometimes we need to kind of handle these particular cases. Yeah.
So this is just one piece which is mapping all kinds of different patterns onto this outbound call, right, which is in the last row, what it is all mapped to. And also what we can see here, so let me go one back. We can see also in the end when you wrote the file, you had 636 rows of code basically, right, to make the transformation, where afterwards it's only a little bit more than 100. So yeah, it's way reduced. Also your own code for the data extraction.
Indeed, yeah. No, for sure. And also the complexity of things, or the potential mistakes you can make along the way or miss out on some things, because it's now like way more automated, and we need less different tables to kind of combine. So this definitely helps. And this definitely helps in the whole process now, because if I get a question like, how are we doing at the moment with respect to like logging or documenting the activities? Of course, you can always, the script is there, so you can rerun the script, but this makes it a bit more easy, because now I only have to do it for like a couple of tables just to adapt, for example, the date and time. So also from a data analytics perspective, this definitely helps.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So I think it's a very stark contrast that we see both for the pictures but also for the data, for the data piece. Now, you've made the system change, but I'm curious maybe to talk a little bit more about also the organizational change that had to go along with it. So were there people also who were resistant to this new way of working, like having to choose from the drop-down list, who were kind of working against that, or?
Yes, but again, I was kind of, in a way, kind of protected, because in a working group, I would say no, with all these sessions that we had throughout time. But the stakeholders that were definitely try to make this whole project a success, they had to get like everyone on board, and they actually had like one-on-one talks as well, because. From a perspective of someone who handles all the cases, then if I document it, then it's documented, right? So we can still reverse engineer what is actually happening. So why should I change the way I put in what I do now at a different location and have to give like different, maybe for a particular person, more ambiguous name to it or whatever it is. So yes, they experience. So I asked them, and they experience some resistance. Not a lot, but you just have to explain what we are trying to do here. And what I got from them is that eventually, kind of everybody is on board, because they are very happy to hear that we kind of want to make the process simpler, and try to kind of figure out where we can make it simpler, try to figure out where we can make it more efficient, where we can improve. And I would say that's something people like to hear, right? So if we can make things simpler, faster, and if then the cost is to kind of document what you're doing somewhere else.
So I can imagine, right? So if you're doing the analysis at first and start to cluster these activities, there's not a lot of impact on the process yet, right? But then you start to draw this conclusion to kind of simplify and then say, we have these 36 groups, and then you start implementing a change. So that's kind of changed the way of working, right? So then there starts to become a new situation. There's no way back when you start doing this.
Definitely.
So did you also see a change from your role, how people kind of react to that and how they were able to kind of powder through, right? So because you have to push through, it's easy way to kind of step back and kind of be in the resistant mode and say, I'm not doing this, right? And then try to put your foot down. But eventually, if you want to make it better, then of course, you have to go through the change and then kind of try to do it all together to make it better. So how did it work in this scenario?
First of all, Rudi, I think that there's like this tremendous change visible also in how the process is actually being done. If you look at like the January 23/24 picture, for example, because like there was this revival of what we here call like 7-up model. So we want to have, if a complaint comes in, that we have contact with the client because we want to hear what they have to say and hopefully kind of get rid of the complaint altogether right away. But otherwise you would get like more information, you hear them, and you can act upon this like new information that you have. And if we look at it like the 23, then it was not always there, like the outbound call. And the ones like the more process owners, they want to have these outbound calls more in the beginning. So that's definitely a change that you see. And I think what helped like powering through in a way is that in a way we made a lot of like process maps with the same settings and kind of showed everybody the process, the process along the way in a way. So I would say like you really need to celebrate like small victories. And every time one activity pops off the screen, it's a victory because it becomes a bit simpler to interpret in a way. So that definitely helps in kind of powering through, I would say.
Just before we go further, I wanted to go back to the 2023 2024 map. So you mentioned we can see it in this map, like the difference from 1 year to 1 year later. Are you talking about the light blue activity here on the right side?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it's a little bit small, right? But is that what activity was that? And did it not take place before and later
I think
in the process?
So that's Antwoord, and then I think the one below the light blue, because and they're close, and that's actually they're close together in time. So that's something we have to change. Well, so sometimes there's like the outbound call, and then they formulate the answer. Other times they have the answer, and then you have the outbound call, because you have the answer to actually inform the client, right? So these are oftentimes interchanged. So we have to set it in a way. I can either set it as Antwoord, then outbound call, or the other way around. So otherwise you would get like this difference already, and it doesn't matter in a way. So that's also what we get from like the domain experts in a way. If this doesn't matter, okay, then we can tweak it that it's simple to interpret because it's kind of in the same step in a way. If you look at the performance indicator timing, then there's no timing difference between these two steps. But especially like the one underneath the light blue one, like the outbound call, that's something we want as Vegas said, to have like these outbound calls. They are not visible or less visible in the left picture because they are there, but they're still scattered around with different naming of the outbound call. So even after clustering, it's not one of the major steps. So that's alarming in a way. But again, then you come back to we might have missed out on a lot of like.
Yeah, you can't say
notes. So you showed the code, like we had 10 lines or 10 different versions of what could actually be an outbound call, but we still missed out on something. So you have to be a bit careful there. So I discussed with the stakeholders, like the data quality kind of goes hand in hand with, for example, reviving the 7-up or looking at the process and see like, okay, are we doing okay? Where do we need to improve? So that's like a nice hand in hand situation there.
Yeah, maybe just briefly reflecting back on what you answered to Rudi before, like in this change process, right? I understood you as a data analyst, it's not your role to actually make this organizational change happen. You have the change coaches for that who are supporting with the handbook, right? Working with the people and the process managers and all you mentioned before. But by visualizing the progress, right, step by step, and celebrating the successes on the way, you also made a contribution in that journey, like in your role as well.
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the learning points that I take from this whole project would actually be to show like the colleagues the process map, because it's like improving every time we showed it along the way, and then it becomes clear what we are improving. That they are actually the ones on the input side, so they're very important for the picture to be nice and interpretable. And I would say, like, maybe even you can say it kind of becomes like a game, right? Every time I show up, like every month, like did they reach a new level of like simpleness with respect to the data and what the process is showing? So that definitely keeps people on board, I would say.
Yeah. So there was another question, right? So we are looking at the process itself, right? And we can see the steps, we can see the deviations, we can see the initial complexity which is being reduced. But from a process point of view, another way to look at it is kind of can you prevent, or what happens upstream, right? So often if you look at the process, this complaints process is maybe the result of something else happening somewhere else in the process, right? You were talking about the dentist, for example. They complain about the bill of the dentist, for example, but something went wrong with the bill, the invoice, and they complaining about because they didn't get a good question. So did you also take a look at the classification of where these complaints were coming from and how they are related upstream?
Yeah. So that's what we started with. I would say, like, it's very rich data, and it could be data about like simple things, but it could also be insights with respect to other internal processes. Because, for example, changing your insurance from one year to the other, it could be that we get a lot of complaints with respect to when it becomes visible in their application, for example. That's very valuable insight because it has to do with like an internal process that if somebody requests a change in their insurance, how fast do we actually process that change and then make it visible for our clients in an online environment, for example. So that's also why we use it, right? So that there's like this nice connection between like the complaints data that says something about the process that we internally have. Things could be too slow, could be vague. People could complain about, like, I don't know what is happening from A to Z. So we make it visible, for example, in a particular environment. So that's definitely helpful. That's definitely helpful.
Yeah. So that's also included as part of the process. So you're looking at the inner workings of the process and try to simplify, optimize that, but also again, take a look at upstream. Where do we see these complaints are coming from, and can we fix the issue in the long term?
And that's the additional information that we get with each complaint, right? Because we know where they're from. We know where they are about. Because the ones that actually book in the complaints, they actually read it and they put like a subject and cause to it. And next to that, as an analytics team, we're actually looking at what I said in the beginning. People can actually have the complaint and then what they expect from us. And they're both open text fields. So we can apply some like natural language processing, like text mining. We can kind of bottom up, kind of figure out what are like hidden themes within each complaint. And then based on the fact that the one who books it in has like the subject and cause in place, we can filter on subject. And for example, see, okay, everything that has to do with reimbursements, what are people talking about? What are they complaining about? That's something we can do as an analytics team. We just look at the hidden themes that are in all these complaints. because then you kind of go systematically through them instead of just picking out a couple of them, reading them, and based on like an N of 5 or 15 or 50, whatever it is, it's very labor intensive. You have to do it like that. So there are things in place that could help us there.
Did you enrich the data by making categories that you added as an additional attribute or something in the data so that you could filter on it again in Disco, for example?
No, yeah. So that was just in binding the different tables together. So we wanted to know like who actually handled the case, these type of things, because in the original data it's just like numbers. So we had to figure out how to get these numbers back to like name to know who did what, and then and that's also from like the stakeholders' perspective. Then they could check. And more on a team type of base improvement or suggestions, because it could be that one team actually follows the process how it is designed, while another team slacks a bit in, for example, the outbound calls. Then we can make it visible now. So there's a bit of enriching the data. Yes and no. Yeah,
Okay. Maybe
needed information from different tables.
One other question from the chat. Maybe we can pick up quickly is Willem is asking if the system change that you made with Salesforce, if that was done together with the functional maintenance colleagues, and I imagine it has to be, right? It's not something that the data analytics team does by themselves, but you.
Yeah, I think so. So I was not involved in the actual change or the correspondence with the one like the account manager from Salesforce or the functional. Part there. So my discussion ended together with the stakeholders from the complaint department, like what should we do? It was more like a dream at that stage, like, oh, it would be really nice to have this. And then I was like, okay, let's check whether we can get this, whether we can get this to work. So they called around, and so that's also sometimes where not my jurisdiction ends, but where my kind of influence ends, or we discussed it together, and I would say like more from like an organic or natural flow that they did that, because they're involved more with Salesforce and filling out all these things. I'm more like getting the data out of Salesforce. So I can imagine that they were involved. Yeah.
Okay, great. Maybe one additional question now. For the analysis, now that you have the improved data, where you actually are more confident, right, to make analysis based on that, because you're not missing a lot of data, you don't have to remove many things. So were you then able to answer all these questions from the beginning, where you actually were hesitant initially, for example, with respect to where there was this gut feeling about the colleagues from a certain department being late? Could you then actually look at when did they receive the request and do some time measurements? How did that go?
Yeah, I think we're actually now in a stage where we, like, each session that we come together, kind of pick on one theme to look at. Whether that would be like, for instance, like two sessions ago, like more the outbound calls, could be like next one would be more about the medical advice when they come in. So we're now at the stage where we say, look, okay, let's sit together, let's look at the process with a particular like question in mind, and go through the different, the different scenarios in a way, because as Rudi mentioned in the beginning, we have different type of complaints, we have different different subjects.
Products.
So we could all filter on these and see like what is happening with respect to the question in mind. So whether that would be like medical advice, or whether that would be whether outbound call is like the second step in the process, or whatever it is. So that's really nice that we can just sit together, have a process. What I said, like we don't have to delete anything anymore or omit. We're not omitting anything. Yeah. So we're actually now looking at the full process as it emerges in a way, which in my opinion is the main power of like process mining, right? That we're not omitting anything and just see how it actually in real life works.
Yeah. Yes, maybe a related question from the chat from Eric, who's asking whether you also discovered some patterns that you maybe didn't look for, that you didn't see that you didn't have the question in advance about, but for example, that certain requests were always routed to one person, or certain types of patterns that revealed themselves in the analysis?
I'm thinking about like one particular pattern that popped up, but then again, that's where I would say either like a data analyst that has a background in complaints, or otherwise sitting together with like the domain experts. So that really helps me to just show to show the process, and now have like this good process in place where we do not omit anything. Because what came to mind was like a lot of like discussions before actually an outbound call, these type of things. Because if I get the more design process, like the VSM type, then there's like this outbound call is like the first step you take if you start handling the case, and that was still not in the process map. So these things just show themselves in a way, so that's surprising. And then you ask around like, okay, what's happening? And then you hear back like, okay, that's an internal discussion. Some people want to have a discussion with a colleague about the complaint before they call the client, so they are really like informed before they can actually talk to the client. While others would say like, just call, then hear what they have to say, use this additional information for a discussion with a colleague or with a different department, for instance. So these things, just emerge, are patterns that emerge if you map the data.
So we are talking here about the role of the data analyst, right? So the data analyst is kind of a term, or at least a term for which you frame that you feel comfortable with, or what your current role is in the organization. So my question is kind of, how do you frame your role, right? So what's part of it, but what do you also see is not part of it anymore, right? So we see different type of roles using process mining, from process managers to Lean Six Sigma type of roles to process analyst, for example. So if you see the role of a data analyst, and if you see the role of a process analyst, for example, where do you kind of see the distinction between them, and what kind of things are you then taking in as part of your activities, but what is kind of out of scope for you?
So for me, the main distinction would be maybe more on the really the data side of things, data quality side of things, like being knowledgeable about like what it means to omit some data, for example. Having the discussions with the stakeholders about what data quality is, how we can actually get there. So what steps, how would I like to see the data coming in a way? And there's like this bit of like gray area, of course, because then you're in discussion like, okay, how can we get this done? What do we need? But then I would say it's like beyond my borders in a way to actually think about, okay, what are the steps that we're going to take with all the colleagues that are working on these complaints to have them document the steps they're doing like correctly. So, then where I come in is just like more than on the check side of things, to just check, hey, are we on a good path in a way? So are the amount of like activities, we started from 12,000, what are they now, what are they now, what are they now? And also figuring out, and that's more like the analyst, like where is the problem? So if we have, for example, still 3,000 activities, what is like the common theme, for example, in the activities? So where does it go wrong? These type of things, I would say, is more like the role of the analyst. And because then, I'm not like 100% like process analyst, because we really need the domain expertise as well to figure out, okay, what is going on, where can we improve? So it's more like an explorative way of like mapping what is happening in a particular process. and of course asking asking questions about what I think is weird in the process or what is surprising to me, these type of things, because it doesn't matter which process map you show, you can always say something, right? Like this seems odd, or it could even be a question like, why is this so straightforward from A to Z, right? It's not supposed to happen or so.
So if you frame it, then you feel, or at least the activities which are part of it is the data extraction, right? Very clearly. Maybe the scoping of the data part. So what type of data, where does the data come from? Then do the extraction, then do the cleaning and the preparation. And then if I talk here about cleaning in the data stage, it means missing values, understanding what the data actually means, identifying the case ID time submit activity to create an event log. And then you start importing it into a process mining tool, right? And then start interpreting. So then we enter kind of the gray area where you still need to be involved, because we are still looking at data and we're still making sense of it, right? But we're also entering the analysis a little bit, because and for the missing values, you can say, it should be there or it shouldn't be there. But if you look at context of the process, then you add domain knowledge, right? Also to validate the data. So is it still part? Do you see it part of your data analyst work, or is that already kind of crossing the boundary?
No, I would say yes, and that has more to do with something we touched upon earlier, like kind of protecting what we can say about the process with respect to the data that we have, so that we do not jump to conclusions that we cannot make, or that we're actually zooming in on something that we still need to figure out via another way. So I would say a data analyst there should still be involved for these type of insights.
Maybe rephrase the question. Do you need to have domain knowledge in order to do that test, or is it a logical test? So for example, I'm loading in the process map and it's bogus, so it doesn't make any sense. So something went wrong with the data preparation. Or does it go further and that you really look, for example, already at the process map existing, or even consult a domain expert in order to make sense out of it, whether or not the quality is good enough?
I would say the last option you give here, Rudy. So just get in contact with domain experts, because on your own it might be very hard to map all these things or cluster all these things. And I would say that I would probably say if you take your hands off it, then nothing will change, right? So it's also it's a bit of a gray area, but you need to do it like together, hand in hand, because they're the ones at the beginning of this whole chain of like data quality. They're actually putting in what they are doing, so they should be on board.
Then let me rephrase the question. So could it also be, is it possible that you are not involved in that part of the process? So that you say, I do the data preparation, and maybe look at the data, wink it a little bit, and then kind of hand it over, and then not be involved anymore. Would that be possible?
I would say that's might be possible in some cases, but that makes it very, very hard.
Very hard.
I would say, because probably you need some knowledge also about like data quality, and then eventually in these talks, that helps. I think if I would ask, they definitely would enjoy my perspective on things as well. I wouldn't say they would get like totally lost, but then maybe the essence of like having this uniform format of documenting what they are doing would then be a bit more lost, probably.
So that means that you are becoming more of a process analyst a little bit, and maybe the process analyst becomes more of a data analyst, right? In these type of scenarios. So you have an overlap in
we're moving towards each other, definitely.
Well, it's nice that we're coming back to this theme of your role as the data analyst, and maybe that's also something we can maybe close with to think a little bit more about the lessons that you learned, right? So in your job as a data analyst, one you already mentioned, like that you celebrate successes and victories on the way. Were there other learning points that you took out of this experience?
One for me is definitely like an eye opener, in a sense. Like normally I would always done like things in either like Python or R, and then show that output. But if you're in like a session with stakeholders and share your screen, and it's like this coding, for some people they might be either distracted or scared by it and kind of turn off by it, so they're not on board anymore. And I figured out like showing in a way like the Disco process map. It's easy on the eyes. It's if the process looks quite straightforward, it's also like becomes way more interpretable than just numbers or anything. So that definitely helped throughout this whole process. That even though the first map was like a crazy wild with a lot of activities, something you cannot interpret, that we had this picture in place towards the end, and then actually it was still like the same snapshot over and over and over again with small adjustments in the right correction or in the right direction. So that's definitely a learning point for me also moving forward, that I would way faster show like the process map, even though it might still be ugly in a way, because it relates to a lot of people, and especially the ones that are in the process themselves or working in the process themselves. So that's definitely a learning point for me. Then I had like upfront, because you get questions along the way, or you need to push back on, for example, what conclusions can we actually draw from the data? Some sort of like definition of done, where I would say as a data analyst, okay, now I'm actually kind of like standing behind the data and say like this data is correct. We can actually interpret it now, have conclusions. And again, I said it before, that depends a bit on. So in the definition of done, there was like a bit of like completeness of the data. So how much do we omit? Accuracy. So a bit of like validity. Are these activities that we see are actually, is that actually what they are doing? That type of check. And then third, there was like consistency of the map in a way, because if it changes from time to time, then there's a high variability. Then you almost need like all the data, like 100% of the data, because otherwise like a smaller sample would suffice if it's like always a consistent pattern. So that's something we did. And again, I think like showing the map, and it kind of becomes like a game of like improving like each time we are looking at the process.
Yeah, working interactively in the workshop, right, with the subject matter experts.
Indeed, and that always triggers, like every session triggers a different question, which is like homework for me to figure out again, and then so that's really fun to see. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, from the data analyst perspective, do we have we discussed everything, or Rudi, were there any other views that we wanted to take on this?
No, I think it goes through the whole process and cycle of a data analyst, right? So what kind of challenge you can encounter. Yeah. And it was a really nice example, right? To see what kind of complexity you can deal with. Well, this complexity can be simplified in a certain way, and it can be done in different ways, right? So you already showed it. You can do it in the data itself, but you can also go to the process and then change the way how things are being recorded in order to simplify. So that's very nice to see that there are multiple ways in order to get there and get the result, and that you can make impact, right? So that's often the goal, what you want to achieve, and here you see that they are changing, right? So you can give them a positive result. So that's very, very nice to see in this example.
Yeah, that's a really nice example. Yes. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that. Looking at the chat, I think so some of the questions are maybe they would warrant a whole own Café session, for example. Marcus is asking, will the use of AI change the way we'll deal with complaints? So maybe that's a whole separate topic. I think Tina is asking about data quality, but we discussed it quite a bit, so maybe she came in a little bit later. We will publish the recording next week or the week thereafter at the latest, so you can all watch it back. But maybe if you want to give us a brief outlook, like, is there any future plans? Are you doing more process mining in the future? What are the next steps for you and your team?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because we're kind of moving towards having a more like outwards in perspective from a customer journey type of perspective. Customers are like in contact with us many times a day on different channels. For example, on the website, with respect to live chat, telephone, app, and we actually have an award-winning app which they also use to get in contact with us to get information. And each time they come in contact with us, we kind of now document like the contact reason. So why they are in contact with us, what are they trying to figure out? So we have all these business rules. If you're looking, for example, at a particular page in the app, then we know what you're looking for. So we document this, and they're all part of sometimes like a customer journey. So a customer journey could, for example, be I want to change the way I'm insured from one year to another. That's like a macro journey, and they're like all contact reasons from beginning to end of that journey. So that's more the outward in perspective. And if they are at the end of the journey, they could get a questionnaire, they give us feedback. And this feedback, of course, again, Rudi, already touched upon this point, right? So, but then with the complaints, but this is like more of a proactive type of asking for feedback. So it's not a complaint, but just feedback. So sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's a bit more negative, sometimes it's neutral. And we analyze this also like sentiment behind what they are saying, and also like hidden themes, but they all are part of like internal processes, right? So if you want to change your insurance from one year to the other, then you could either do it, for example, asking it on the telephone. You could do it yourself in an application. You could do it on the website. It maybe have like different outcomes with respect to how satisfied customers are with respect to the question I send out. So we can check then the internal processes and kind of see whether, for example, if something comes in from the website, that we actually process it way faster and have it visible for the customer faster than via the application, for example. And that might be the reason why customers doing it via channel A are more satisfied than via channel B. So it really becomes like more immersed from the outside in perspective and looking at our internal processes to actually explain where we can actually service our customers better, to have like this good customer experience. So that's definitely a way, like a pathway that we're moving into. It becomes ever more important for us to do this, and also to see how they go from channel to channel. Because that could also be an indication. So if you have a particular question and you go to the app, and then you go to the website, and then you still call, then it might be an indication, like the easy process based on like identifier of a customer that they're there, then they're there, then they're there with the same question. Then it might be an indication that the app or the website doesn't suffice in giving the information that the customer needs, so they still need to call. And you rather not have that, because that takes time, money. So, and also from like the customer perspective, if they're looking for something, you want to have like this first time right? So you want to have to service them. So that's also what we're looking into, how they're actually moving from channel to channel with respect to what they're actually looking for.
Yeah. Great example. Yes. Now, of course, that's definitely one of the also really interesting use cases for process mining, this customer journey analysis. We have done a Café about that in the past, and I'm sure, Rudi, right, we will do another one.
In the future.
Yes. So I think that's it for today. Thanks a lot for coming on and for sharing this interesting project and really taking us through the stages of how this looks like as a data analyst, and all the ins and outs. I think we all learned a lot from that. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on and be able to share this story. Thank you.
Very welcome. Yes, and thanks to all of you for watching, for joining us, sharing your questions.
For the great questions. Yes.
Yeah, great questions. Yes, thank you all. And we see each other again for the next Process Mining Café next month, and then we are going to talk about HR processes, human resources processes. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.